The autumn wind howled through the small town of Bristlewood, sending leaves swirling through the empty streets and casting eerie shadows under the streetlights. Sarah Thompson pulled her jacket tighter around her as she walked her golden retriever, Max, along the familiar path through the woods near her home. The moon hung high, casting a silver light over the forest, and Max trotted happily beside her, his tail wagging with excitement. Max had always loved their nightly walks. He would bound ahead, chasing after the occasional squirrel or sniffing curiously at a fallen branch. Sarah cherished these moments of peace and solitude, away from the bustle of her job and the worries of daily life. But tonight there was something different in the air. A feeling of unease settled over her as they ventured deeper into the woods. "Come on, Max," she called, her voice wavering slightly. "Let's not go too far tonight." Max looked back at her with his bright, trusting eyes before darting off into the underbrush. Sarah sighed, knowing that he would return soon. He always did. Minutes passed, and Sarah found herself calling for Max again. "Max, come on, boy." Her voice echoed through the trees, but there was no sign of her faithful companion. Panic began to gnaw at her insides as she pushed through the bushes, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "Max, where are you?" A rustle in the leaves caught her attention, and she spun around, heart pounding. "Max?" A shape emerged from the shadows, but it wasn't her golden retriever. It was a figure, hunched and twisted, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Sarah froze, her breath catching in her throat. The creature let out a low, guttural growl before disappearing into the darkness. Terror seized Sarah, and she turned and ran, stumbling through the underbrush back to the safety of her home. She burst through the front door, slamming it shut behind her and locking it with trembling hands. She called the local authorities, but they found no trace of Max in the woods. Days turned into weeks, and there was still no sign of her beloved dog. Just as Sarah was beginning to lose hope, a familiar bark echoed outside her house. She rushed to the door and threw it open, tears of relief streaming down her face. There stood Max, his golden fur matted and dirty, but otherwise unharmed. "Max, oh Max," she cried, wrapping her arms around him. He licked her face, his tail wagging furiously. Sarah brought him inside, cleaned him up, and fed him his favorite meal. But as the days passed, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Max was different. He was quieter, more distant. His eyes, once full of warmth and joy, now seemed cold and calculating. One night, as Sarah lay in bed, she heard strange noises coming from downstairs, soft whispers, like voices speaking a language she couldn't understand. She crept down the stairs, her heart pounding in her chest, and peered into the living room. Max was sitting in the middle of the room, his head tilted to one side as if listening to something. The whispers grew louder, and Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She called out to Max, but he didn't respond. Instead, he slowly turned his head to look at her, and she saw that his eyes were glowing with the same unnatural light she had seen in the woods. "Max," she whispered, her voice trembling, "what's happening?" Max let out a low growl, and the whispers stopped. He stood up and walked towards her, his movements slow and deliberate. Sarah backed away, fear gripping her heart. This wasn't her dog. This was something else, something ancient and malevolent. She ran back to her bedroom and locked the door, her mind racing. She had heard stories of skinwalkers, shape-shifting creatures from Native American folklore that could take the form of animals, but those were just legends, right? As the night wore on, Sarah could hear Max scratching at the door, his growls turning into eerie, almost human-like whispers. "Let me in, Sarah, let me in." She covered her ears, tears streaming down her face. "You're not Max. You're not my dog." The scratching stopped, and there was silence. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she waited, afraid to move. Then slowly, the door began to creak open. She hadn't locked it well enough. Standing in the doorway was Max, or at least the thing that looked like him. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and its mouth twisted into a grotesque smile. "Sarah," it whispered, its voice a chilling blend of human and animal. Why are you afraid? Don't you love me? Sarah screamed and threw a lamp at the creature, but it merely sidestepped, its movements unnaturally fluid. Stay away from me, she shouted, backing into the corner of the room. The creature took a step closer, its smile widening. You can't run from me, Sarah. I'm always with you. Desperation took hold, and Sarah grabbed a pair of scissors from her nightstand, holding them out defensively. What do you want from me? The Skinwalker paused, its eyes narrowing. I want what was taken from me. I want my freedom, and you, Sarah, are the key. Before she could react, the creature lunged at her, knocking the scissors from her hand and pinning her to the ground. Its touch was ice cold, and she could feel her strength draining away. No, she gasped, struggling to break free. No! The Skinwalker leaned in close, its breath foul and rancid. You can't escape your fate, Sarah. You belong to me now. With a final surge of strength, Sarah managed to shove the creature off her and scramble to her feet. She ran out of the room and down the stairs, her only thought to get away from the thing that had taken over her beloved Max. She burst out of the house and into the night, the cool air a shock to her system. She could hear the creature behind her, its growls growing louder and more menacing. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to keep moving. The woods loomed ahead, dark and foreboding, but she had no choice. She plunged into the trees, branches scratching at her arms and face as she ran. The whispers started again, surrounding her, filling her mind with fear and confusion. Sarah, they called. Come back, Sarah. She stumbled and fell, scraping her knees on the rough ground. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. She could feel the Skinwalker closing in, its presence a suffocating weight on her soul. With a cry of desperation, she pushed herself up and continued running, her breaths coming in ragged gasps. She could see a light up ahead, a glimmer of hope in the darkness. She headed towards it, her legs burning with exhaustion. The light grew brighter, and she realized it was coming from a small cabin nestled in the trees. She reached the door and pounded on it frantically. Help, please, help me! The door creaked open, and an elderly man peered out. His eyes widened in shock as he saw Sarah. What's going on? He asked, his voice filled with concern. Please, Sarah begged. There's something after me. It took my dog. It's not him, it's a monster. The man's expression turned serious, and he ushered her inside, locking the door behind them. You're safe now, he said, leading her to a chair. Tell me everything. Through sobs and gasps, Sarah recounted her story. The man listened intently, nodding occasionally. When she finished, he sat back inside. I've heard tales of skinwalkers before, but I never thought I'd encounter one. What do we do? Sarah asked, her voice trembling. The man stood and went to a cabinet, pulling out a small pouch filled with herbs and other items. We fight fire with fire, he said. This is a protection charm. It won't kill the Skinwalker, but it will keep it at bay long enough for us to find a solution. He handed the pouch to Sarah, who clutched it tightly. Thank you, she whispered. The man nodded. Stay here. I'll go check the perimeter. Make sure it hasn't followed you. He stepped outside, and Sarah waited, her heart pounding in her chest. Minutes felt like hours as she sat there, clutching the charm and praying for safety. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the cabin, and the door flew open. The Skinwalker stood there, its eyes blazing with fury. You can't hide from me, Sarah, it hissed. You belong to me. Sarah held up the charm, her hands shaking. The creature recoiled, snarling in anger. This isn't over, it spat before disappearing into the night. The man returned, his face grim. It's gone for now, but it will come back. We need to find a way to banish it for good. Together they researched ancient texts and rituals, seeking a way to defeat the Skinwalker. Days turned into weeks, and the creature continued to haunt Sarah's dreams, its whispers echoing in her mind. Finally, they found a ritual that promised to banish the Skinwalker forever. It required a powerful sacrifice, a bond of love and trust. Sarah knew what she had to do. The night of the ritual, she stood in the clearing where she had last seen the creature. The man stood beside her, chanting the ancient words. The air crackled with energy as the Skinwalker appeared, its form shifting and contorting. Sarah, it whispered, you can't do this. You love me. Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she held up the charm and spoke the final words of the ritual. I release you, Max. I release you from this curse. The Skinwalker let out a piercing scream as it began to dissolve, its form unraveling into the night. No, it cried. You can't do this. But it was too late. The ritual completed and the Skinwalker vanished, leaving only silence in its wake. Sarah fell to her knees, exhausted and heartbroken. The man placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. It's over, he said softly. You did it. She nodded, tears still flowing. I just wish I could have saved him. In the days that followed, Sarah found a measure of peace, knowing that Max was finally at rest. The woods no longer held the same terror for her, and she began to heal. But sometimes, late at night, she could still hear the whispers, a reminder of the darkness that had once claimed her beloved dog. And she knew that while the Skinwalker was gone, the memory of its evil would haunt her forever.